Hey everyone, I'm back with some more standard action. Some more Jeskai, but a little different flavor. I've been making the rounds through basically every deck in standard, and kind of unsurprisingly, I suppose, these are the colors that I've been doing the best with. I have kind of a history with blue, white, red, and I think I know how to build it and play it pretty well. So last week I started with the baseline, like, super aggressive version, and I kind of shifted that into a more controlling version. So this deck might look kind of weird, but this is by far the deck that I've been performing with the best, despite the weird numbers and just the overall nonsensicalness of it. So it's been kind of strange, but basically the CFB guys decided to play Nullify in their Jeskai deck because the deck didn't have a lot of 2-drops, and when you're deploying stuff like Mantis Rider or Goblin Rabblemaster on turn 3, you basically want the board to be clear, and Nullify helps you do that. So it makes you kind of shift the mana base in such a way that you're like Boros splashing blue into your like blue-red, maybe splashing white. And this deck is kind of like the full 3, although I feel like red is more of a splash. So and then you saw other decks like Sean McLaren's from the Pro Tour just be more controlling overall, and especially with his sideboard, he could transition into almost a full control deck. And this deck is kind of like a semi-pre-boarded version of that. So, like I said, it looks pretty weird, but the gist of the deck is try to stick a Mantis Rider or a Brimaz, and if they deal with those, that's okay. We're no longer relying on our creatures to deal, like 8 points of damage that our burn spells can close it out. Instead, you play these as kind of like bait targets, I guess, where like they can kill these and that's fine. And then the game will go on long and you'll eventually overwhelm them with things like Dig Through Time and Elspeth. But having, like, you might think that, like, oh, like, why even play the creatures? You could make their removal just completely dead, and that's kind of true, but not really, because of things like Hero's Downfall and Banishing Light, which are also good against your Planeswalkers. So you play stuff like Mantis Rider and Brimaz to kind of take the heat off of things like Sarkhan and Elspeth, so that by the time you start deploying these things, like, their hand is going to be pretty light. And if they don't have a removal spell, then these things like Brimaz and Mantis Rider are probably the two best creatures that can just kill them outright. Like, sure, Rabblemaster, if unchecked, is like very, very powerful, obviously, but Rabblemaster doesn't really match up too well against things like Corsair or Crewfix, whereas like Brimaz, even though it only has 3 power and Corsair has 4 power, like either they block your token and you're getting in for 3 every turn, or they're blocking your Brimaz and you're amassing a bunch of tokens. So I think Brimaz is actually pretty good against Corsair. It's the things like Siege Rhino that you really have to get out of the way, and honestly, like, you just don't really want those to resolve anyway. So if those things are resolving, kind of a problem, but I think that's a problem for basically any Jeskai deck. So you have some creatures, and then a lot of late game stuff, and then post board things get kind of weird where, do they respect your creatures or don't they? For most game 2s, I've just been siding out the Mantis Riders. Brimaz is a pretty good brick wall against a lot of things. Like, there might not be a ton of like mono red aggro or tokens and whatnot in real life, but those have a pretty big presence on Magic Online. And even though those decks aren't doing well, like, people are going to play those decks, and you have to respect those. And to that end, I really like the Jeskai version over something like blue-white control, like straight blue-white control. Like Jeremy Bylander got second at the Open last weekend in Minneapolis with straight blue-white, and I liked his deck a lot. There are some things I would change, and my article this week should cover that. Actually, it should be article tomorrow. But having access to something like Anger of the Gods is very, very important against those decks, whereas something like blue-white relying on just end hostilities and like some kind of mediocre removal spells isn't really going to get the job done. So I could see some number of Anger's main deck, and I've seen some decks like this pop up, like Fabrizio. I can't pronounce his last name. I don't, Antiri maybe, but he kind of like got famous last year because he finished first, second, and third in a few European Grand Prix, and I believe he is a gold pro now. He's on the train. He finished in top 16 of GP Los Angeles with a deck very similar to this. And I started with Jeskai Control, and then I adopted a lot of things from his list too. So this deck is like kind of proven already. Like people are already doing pretty well with it. So he had 2 Anger of the Gods main deck, which is why I bring that up. And that's certainly a reasonable thing. I have Dissolves where he had Strokes, and I think Dissolve is pretty good. One of the problems with this deck is that it has a lot of 3-drops. There's a high concentration here, and part of that is because there are just a lot of good 3s, and I feel like you need a lot of them. Like, Jeskai Charm is an instant speed interaction spell, which this deck is kind of lacking, especially for things that just hit any creature. And also Jeskai Charm has a lifelink mode, which is, again, really, really important against those aggressive decks. So I wanted 2 Jeskai Charms. I wanted the Riders and the Brimazes. Ideally, I would have more Banishing Lights, I think. Banishing Light is just a really nice catch-all, even if there is some hate for enchantments. And then there's Dissolve, which could be Stroke, but I like Dissolve. So, I don't know. I mean, I could see an argument either way. Dissolve is just like this hard counter. I could see shifting like one of the Dissolves over to a Stroke, and that might be better. I could see Anger's main deck over something like Magma Jet, but again, that creates more 3-drops. And the Jets are in the deck, even though they don't have a ton of targets, like they're Seeker of the Way and Rabblemaster, but you just need more 2-mana interaction, just because if you fall behind, it's really, really hard to catch up. So I have a couple Magma Jets. Those could be Angers, because in theory, like, if you're jetting, the Rabblemaster or whatever, Anger could do kind of the same job on the next turn, and that might still be fine. But I think I would rather, like, play Magma Jet and then slam a 3-drop, and then just kind of go from there. So, again, deck is not perfect, but doing the best that I can. I've been playing this off and on for the last week or so, and have been winning a lot of 8-mans and have 4-0'd a couple dailies, so hopefully we can run that back today. But back to the deck. I have a couple end hostilities. I started with 3, trimmed it down to 2. Very, very good against green decks. I basically don't feel like you can play a deck with white in it without end hostilities in your 75 unless you want to lose to something like Green Devotion. And maybe that will change as, things like blue-white control pop up. There are end hostilities main deck, and people will have to adapt to those. But in the meantime, people are still playing that deck, and you still have to respect it. So I have some end hostilities, just a nice little catch-all. And then 2 Sark and 2 Elspeth. It could be 1 Elspeth, at least for game 1s, just because you're more threat dense. And you have a lot of counter spells. Maybe you would have to play it a little bit more patiently and wait until you have like Elspeth plus Dissolve or whatever. But basically, I've been fine like playing Elspeth, making 3 guys, getting it downfalled, and then just like using those tokens plus a Mantis Rider to kill them. And then if Elspeth sticks, obviously it's great. If you get to play Elspeth, kill the Rhino, then they downfall it, that's also fine. And then the main thing that I adopted from Fabrizio's list are the Steam Auguries, and I'm not a huge fan of this card. I think I know a way in which Steam Augury is the best. Like, I know a way to make it the best, and that's to make your deck have all the same stuff. So if you are all counter spells, or you're all burn spells, or whatever, I think Steam Augury is great. And this deck is kind of reminiscent of the blue-white red decks I tried to build, starting with when Theros came out, so like RTR and Theros, and my decks were kind of all over the place, just like this deck. And Steam Augury underperformed, and I was just like, I don't get it. And then one of the guys posted on my forums and was like, hey dude, like this is reality. This is what it is. And this is what Steam Augury does, and this is where it would be great. And I was like, dude, you're really smart. That makes a ton of sense. And he was right. And I think Steam Augury in something like Kevin Jones's list, where he's very much an aggressive deck and has a bunch of burn spells, like the cards in the deck are all pretty much the same thing. But when you're casting Steam Augury and it's like, oh, I really need this Banishing Light to kill this thing, or I really need a sweeper, or I really need a finisher like Elspeth, you're never going to get what you want off Steam Augury. However, if you Steam Augury into like 3 burn spells and 2 lands, like, you're pretty golden. You're either getting probably 2 burn spells or 2 land in a burn spell, and that's great. Then Steam Augury is doing its job. And in this case, I look at Steam Augury like I either get like 3 kind of bad cards or 2 cards that I actually want. But in the meantime, it fills up my graveyard for dig through time, and that's the big one, because despite being all spells, so, like, dig through time is not really active until like turn 5 or 6. But if you go Steam Augury, you're like, boom, I have a bunch of resources, I can do whatever I want. Hopefully that kind of just like parlays you into being able to play all the spells from your hand that are already pretty good, but maybe you're choked on mana or whatever. But then you can just fire off a dig through time for 2 mana, and it's very simple, very easy. And then hopefully that finds you what you need, or at least finds you like an answer to what your opponent has, plus another dig through time, which is still going to be pretty cheap because of the Steam Augury. So Steam Augury, fine magic card, gives you a bunch of resources, and I think this deck does want to go up on resources. Like, it wants some sort of like divination or font of fortunes, but Steam Augury, because of the interaction with dig through time, I think is the best one. And I've been reasonably happy with this. And I've tried a bunch of different versions of this deck, and this is the one that I keep coming back to just because, God, it looks so weird, but it's really hard to lose. So, I don't know. As far as the mana base, it's kind of weird. I wanted all my ETB tap duels to make blue, because if I'm playing those on turn 1, I want to play Nullify on turn 2, so they all need to make blue. So you're not going to see any Temple of Triumphs. You're actually going to see a Tranquil Cove. Hello. Gain some life. And that is because basically I just want another blue-white dual land, and I think that's the best one. Like, I could certainly play the 4th Temple of Epiphany, but you can't play too many blue-red duels when you're trying to cast Brimaz and End Hostilities and Elspeth and stuff. Like, if I only needed single white, then it would be no big deal. I would just play all the Epiphanies. But in this case, it's kind of weird where Mystic Monastery is by far your best duel, and then past that, it's like kind of touch and go what you actually want to play for your mana base. So the mana base is still a work in progress. I don't feel like the Cove is 100% right, you know, but for right now, it has been giving me what I wanted, so, you know, there it is. And other than that, I ended up with 4 Battlefield Forges. Doesn't cast Nullify, but between the 4 Forges and 2 Plains, that's only 6 lands out of 26 that don't cast Nullify. So overall, not that bad. The thing with Forge is that when I have a bunch of blue-red duels, and if I have a Battlefield Forge, then I'm basically unlocked, you know? Like, I don't want... This is so hard to explain, I guess. I don't know. It's like, if I have a Temple of Epiphany or any blue-red duel, I don't want a land that doesn't make white. So if I have Forge, and then basically all my other lands make blue, then I have blue-red duel, Battlefield Forge, and a blue source. And then I can cast all my spells. And that's ultimately the goal of the deck, is to just make the mana work. And to that end, I'm not playing any basic mountains. I started with 2 and then just, like, cut 1 and then cut the other, just because that's actually how the 4th Forge got in here. It's just because basic mountain doesn't help you. You need that land that makes red to also add blue or white, because you have things like Dissolve and Brimaz. So you can't just have basic mountain. So the mana base is weird. It is super, super weird. I end up taking a lot of damage to cast my red spells, which there's not really a whole way around that, except for playing more lands that make red on turn 1. But like I said, I can't play a bunch of Epiphanies. I'm already maxing on Mystic Monastery. I can't play Triumph because of Nullify, so then we need Pain lands, and we can't play Mountains. So that's how we ended up with a bunch of Battlefield Forges. So sometimes Sarkhan is either uncastable or costs you a life or 2, but it's whatever, you know. Like, you don't need to jam that guy in turn 5 in this deck. And there are enough red sources. It's just like, maybe you have to be I don't know, just a little more willing to scry that land at the top if you need a red source, which kind of stinks in this deck, but this deck likes making land drops. So a bunch of weird stuff going on. Like I said, not sure I can really explain it all, just because, you know, this is like the first week or so I've been playing the format. Definitely the first week I've been playing this deck, and I can tell you that I'm winning a bunch of games with this deck, and it looks weird, and maybe I can make it better, but I don't know. So we're gonna play with this today and see how that goes. And then for the sideboard, a few more strokes. Stroke is pretty good in this format. There are a lot of forecasting costs on higher spells, and this kind of takes the wind out of their sails. And this is one of the few cards along with Nullify, that if they go turn 2 Caryatid into Rhino on the play, you have an answer for. Whereas normal Jeskai decks would kind of struggle against that. You know, they would have the 3 strokes, and then that's it. So I have a couple negates, good in mirror-ish type matches, and if I want to fight Jeskai really hard, I would play a 3rd negate. Like, the beatdown Jeskai decks, if they have a bunch of counterspells and God's Willings and stuff, is actually kind of tough. So 3rd negate would help there. I have another End Hostilities for green decks, more Banishing Lights as catch-alls. These could probably be something better, something more specific, but haven't really found anything that I need them to be. And then I have some Nyx Fleece Rams, which, not a huge fan of the card in general, but is doing pretty good work against the tokeny type decks, and even against the other Jeskai decks. It's fine against Abzan aggro. It does a ton of work and gives you a bunch of time to go into your late game. And one of the things I really liked with Biolander's deck that he did was that he sideboarded 2 Wingmate Rocks. And that allowed him to kind of transition into like this Ram, Brimaz, Wingmate Rock deck against decks that he had inevitability against naturally, just because his deck is super powerful going long. But in decks where you, like, against matchups where you kind of have to shift your game plan, because that, like, the only playing for inevitability isn't going to get you there. So I really like that, and that's another reason to play Ram, because it's a big thing that blocks, gains you life, and then eventually can attack and trigger raid for Wingmate Rock. So that was pretty cool. So I might end up playing some rocks in the sideboard. That wouldn't surprise me at all. I have a random Glare and a random Erase. Erase is 4 Ascendancy. I'm a little soft there, I assume. I don't know. I actually haven't even played against the matchup. But it's also a card that you can bring in against like Courser, Eidolon of Blossoms, like the Doomwake Giant decks, that type of stuff. And then Glare of Heresy kills Rhino, kills Banishing Light, and just overall solid card. And then the Angers, which I talked a lot about and I really like. So that's it. That's the deck. Please excuse my deck name. Josh Cho got on my account and decided to start building this deck. Like, I had the idea, and he was like, that sounds cool, I'm going to build it and see what it looks like, and he just named it AIDS. And I can't change it. I wish I could just right-click, rename. I can make a copy of the deck, but I can't, like, change the name there either. So at some point, I will not be lazy, and I'll just rebuild this deck with a new name. So pardon me if this offends anyone. That was not my intention. You can blame Josh Cho for that, but that's it for the deck tech. That was super long, but lots of stuff going on. Again, I'll have an article tomorrow about this deck and Control in general, so if you want more information, check that out. But let's get on to the games.